Well, my students, welcome to week 6. This is going to be a comparatively lighter week. The discussion is optional and the quiz is open book. The quiz is pulled from our textbook, the American YARP, and it's to make sure that you've read the chapters and you've really engaged with the material. The quiz will also include some recycled questions from some of the previous tests. So this is really, for me at least, a very interesting time in American history, because the same energy and hubris and innovation and drive that characterized America during the industrial age, it takes an international turn. This energy begins to look upon the rest of the world, and America starts to emerge as an empire on the international stage. Now, we don't normally think of America as an empire, and while the term was used during the Bush years as the United States began trying to clean up the Middle East, there's a sense in which America became an empire only 100 years after winning independence from Britain. And as you read the chapters in our textbook, you'll learn about the relationship between empire and immigration, economics, and also how there was an anti-immigrant nativist backlash that resulted in new immigration controls. And that's very interesting in light of what we're dealing with in our country today. Both imperialism and immigration raised questions in the late 19th, early 20th century about American identity. What is American identity? Is there a distinct American identity, or is it just a melting pot? Is it infinitely flexible? These were all questions that started to emerge in the public discourse at this time. And they're questions that we're still wrestling with today. Now, late 19th century imperialism and foreign interventionism, it wasn't primarily because of a foreign focus, but to protect interests at home. These wars of expansion were often conceptualized in defensive terms, or as preventative action, or as an economic necessity in order to protect industry and finances on the mainland. So it's very much it was different in that respect than some of the empires from history. I was going to say Rome, but we could debate whether the Roman Empire ultimately had a domestic focus or not. But let's give some examples. For example, in 1900, President William McKinley waged war in China to protect American commerce by forcing China to pursue free trade policies that benefited America. And that was the time of the Boxer Rebellion. And earlier, as early as 1856, America had taken over the Guano Islands in order to harvest fertilizer. The 1856 Act authorizing this enabled the United States to claim more than 100 islands, including 10 territories that the United States still owns today. They're not states, but they're part of the quote-unquote United States insofar as it's a territory that's owned by America. And there's 10 of these islands, and earlier in the 19th century, America used this act to claim more than 100 islands. And you'll read about that in the American. It's not the American YARP, like I said earlier. It's the American YOP. Yup. Anyway, some of the acquisitions were actually made into states, like Hawaii. the United States annexed Hawaii in the 1890s, and Hawaii did actually become a state. Now, much of this was justified as a result of a new interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President James Monroe had declared that European powers could not engage in further colonization or intervention in the Western Hemisphere, just as the United States would not interfere in European affairs. But Theodore Roosevelt expanded the Monroe Doctrine by declaring that the U.S. could take preemptive action by intervening in unstable Latin America to protect countries from to protect chaotic or insecure countries or countries that were going through revolutions, to protect those countries from being taken advantage of by European powers. So when the Latin American country was going through a disruption or so forth, there was the danger of it being exploited, maybe even just economically exploited by European powers. So Theodore Roosevelt, in his expanded version of the Monroe Doctrine, said that America could intervene in those countries, and this was a way to gain power in Central America. And then it was extended to the Caribbean, and then eventually this expanded doctrine, Monroe Doctrine, was taken to expand to all of the Pacific. So it came to have a fluid understanding that was actually opposed to the original spirit in which President James Monroe had first proposed it. Spend some time in the textbook. Really goes through. This is very interesting information. We often gloss over this part of American history. Many people don't know, for example, that the Philippines and Cuba used to be owned by the United States. And this all becomes very important for when we move into the World War I and World War II era. So as you work through the chapter on the American Empire, you'll learn how at the close of the 19th century, America fought 10, 15 week, depending how you date it, but a short war with Spain. We went to war with Spain to take over some of their lands. We took over the Philippines from Spain. We took over Cuba and other territories from Spain. And after the Spanish-American War, we fought a guerrilla war against the native populations of the Philippines, a very bloody war in order to conquer the Philippines from the native populations after supposedly liberating them from Spanish rule. And look at some of the pictures, some of the cartoons at the time that show public sentiment reactions to what was going on. They've really done a great service in gathering together a lot of the cartoons and pictures that appeared in newspapers at the time. So you can see the different views that Americans had and some of the humorous ways that they express that. But I'll also read some of the primary sources in the American Yelp primary source reader, and you'll get a sense from what the people who were in favor of expansionism, but also what the critics, people like William James and Mark Twain, what the critics were saying, who warned against the increasing imperialist direction that the country was heading in. Now, this week we'll also be considering the Progressive era. Among the growing middle class, reform became trendy. And if you attend to many of the causes that people were taking up in the Progressive era, it really gives you a glimpse into the dynamics and suffering that was going on at the time. And I want to just read. I know you're going to be reading this in the book, but I thought at the beginning of chapter 20, I thought it was just a really good summary of this progressive period. and some of the movement to social activism that was occurring. Put it up here on the screen. The many problems associated with the Gilded Age, the rise of unprecedented fortunes and unprecedented poverty, controversies over imperialism, urban squalor, a near war between capital and labor, loosening social mores, unsanitary food production, the onrush of foreign immigration, environmental destruction, and the outbreak of political radicalism confronted Americans. Terrible forces seemed out of control, and the nation seemed imperiled. Farmers and workers had been waging political war against capitalists and political conservatives for decades. But then slowly, toward the end of the 19th century, a new generation of middle-class Americans interjected themselves into public life and advocated new reforms to tame the runaway world of the Gilded Age. Widespread dissatisfaction with new trends in American society spurred the Progressive era, named for the various progressive movements that attracted various constituencies around various reforms. Americans had many different ideas about how the country's development should be managed and whose interests required the greatest protection. Reformers sought to clean up politics. Black Americans continued their long struggle for civil rights. Women demanded a vote with greater intensity while also demanding a more equal role in society at large. And workers demanded higher wages, safer workplaces, and the union recognition that would guarantee these rights. Whatever their goals, reform became the word of the age, and the sum of their efforts, whatever their ultimate impact or original intentions, gave the era its name. So enjoy this week. As I say, it's a bit of a lighter week. The discussion is optional. And the topic for the discussion is what do you think about American empire? Is it new to you? Are you surprised to learn that the Americans fought a war to kill people to take over the Philippines and Cuba and annexed numerous islands? We don't really talk about this because these territories no longer belong to the United States, but some people they find this a surprise. So feel free to share your thoughts in the discussion, or don't. As I say, the discussion is optional, and there will be a quiz that's open book and is drawn from the chapters this week, as well as the supplementary content that I've presented in this video. Feel free to email me as usual if you have any questions or run into any problems. Bye.